I'm Gloria White. Today is March the 4th, 2025. The Heritage Museum of Montgomery County, Texas History Video Project. Funding is provided by the Conroe Rotary Club of Conroe, Texas. Today, my guest is retired Brigadier General Connie Mcnabb. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Can you tell us when you were born?
I was born in 1954.
Okay, and where?
In Canton, Ohio.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit about your parents and what were their occupations?
My folks we were in Canton, Ohio. My dad was a physician. He was born in 1908. He graduated from Case Western Reserve Medical School in 1936. And by the time he finished his internship and residency and was ready to go out and start making a living, it was 1941. Well, guess what happened? World War II. So he and all of his classmates who'd been together since 1932 and the freshmen in medical school, they all went through the South Pacific together in the 4th Army Battalion Hospital. So by the time he got through the war, got home, he started his civilian life, at a further, advanced age. He and my mom got married in 1951. Mm-hmm. My mom, he was Cleon Chesterfield coach. Had been a basketball coach prior to going into medical school, and worked his way through and pretty hard scrabble, but he was a surgeon and a urologist in our town. My mom, Elizabeth, was born in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She was born in 1920. She and all her siblings went and enlisted in the Army right after Pearl Harbor. So she was in the European theater. Dad was in the Pacific theater. They didn't meet until Canton, Ohio. And so my brother was born in 1951 and I was born in 1954.
What's your brother's name?
Joel.
Okay. Say, what kind of job or career did you have before you went into the military? Talk about that.
Okay. I'm a veterinarian by trade. I went to Ohio State University. I graduated in 1981. Right after James Herriot wrote all his books, that was when I was just starting my pre-vet, and suddenly everybody on the planet wanted to be a veterinarian. So anyone who made it in had to dig down deep to make the grades, got in, just had it in my mind that I wanted to do large animal. And at the time, now women veterinarians are very common. At the time, it was not common. It was about 15% of our class were women, and only about 5 of us went into large animal practice. So I practiced in the mountains of North Carolina was my first job, and the area that got hit so hard by Hurricane Helene was my practice area. I'm very familiar with all of that area, and my heart hurts for all those wonderful people. But I did large animal, and people, to describe that practice, if you've ever read any of the James Herriot books, that was me with a female and a southern accent. But all of that small family farm up in the mountains of North Carolina, because at the time the money had not moved into North Carolina yet. It was still very much family farms that had been there for generations, and people with massive gardens and a milk cow, and just getting by. So great to serve those people, but it was also when the prime rate was 21%, and I had a business loan I had to pay off. So after a couple of years, the bank said, fun is fun, but we need money. There were people who paid me in chickens and firewood. They paid me as they could because that's what they had. But when you have a bank loan, you have to, they're not interested in firewood. So I got into the horse business, and that's what had always attracted me, though my first practice was just whatever, any farm animals, you name it. So ran a breeding farm, an Arabian breeding farm in Gastonia, North Carolina for a breeding season, and was then recruited to run a breeding farm in Kentucky. Made it Kentucky, got through another breeding season, and I could see that there was a lot of work out there in the countryside, so I bid the breeding farm business adieu, because you only make a living for about 6 months out of the year, and the rest of the time you wonder if your phone is working. But out in the countryside in Kentucky, there were a lot of horses coming off the track that needed someone who would do the sick horse, hurt horse work. I started to do that, and a number of my clients said, why don't you come down to the track? And I said, great. And that track happened to be Churchill Downs. Wow. So what a great place to practice, and people didn't quibble with you over practicing the highest level of medicine that you could to do the best, because when you're working on horses of that caliber, we're not going to quibble about another x-ray view or whatever. It's just what does it take to make sure that this horse is sound and healthy? And the niche that I cut out was doing the hurt horse, sick horse work, and then doing the physical therapy types of things, the illicit drugs that some of the veterinarians, got into. All that frightened me, and plus it wasn't good for the horses. So I had a good and strong practice, and right at about 10 years of being a veterinarian, 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, no personal life whatsoever, no days off. There were a couple of times that, get home, eat a little bit of dinner, be exhausted, and just have to look up and say, God, is this what you have in mind for me? Is this it? And, if it is, okay, but if it isn't, and as people of faith know, he has a sense of humor. And so one day as I got home, again, out of the house at 5 in the morning and getting home at 7, 8 o'clock at night was the routine, and in my car, and pulled the mail out of the mailbox, and in that mail was a little postcard that said, "Are you ready for a change?" And I just said, "Dang straight I am," and stuck it back in the mailbox and didn't think a thing about it. For a couple weeks later, I got a telephone call from a Air Force Technical Sergeant Jordan, and he said, "Dr. Couch, I understand you're interested in joining the Air Force." What? What?
Those were postcards you had returned, right?
I had never even looked at it. It was just, "Are you ready for a change?"
And you said yes.
Yes, I am. And he said, you returned the postcard, and he said, it said, "Are you ready for a change?" And, if you feel the hand of God to hit you in the back of the head, it was kind of one of those, here's your chance to make a break for it. So I gave it a lot of thought and said, it's at the time I was 37 years old.
So you was 37 years old,
and I had a very successful practice as far as a solo practitioner, but my quality of life was terrible, and a war was breaking out. It was just as Desert Storm, the very earliest stages of that were starting to happen, and I figured, at 37 I can go do anything for, because signing up for the Air Force, I didn't owe the Air Force anything, so it was a 3-year commitment. So I can do anything for 3 years, and if I want to come back to this, I can come back to this, or I can start a practice up. I mean, I know how to get out there and hustle the business and do the work. And so I said, okay. And so I joined the Air Force, and it was a great experience.
Okay, what did your parents think about that?
My parents were passed away by that point.
Okay, your parents. So you joined at 37 years old,
right?
And your brother was still there.
My brother lives in Boston. He, growing up together, we were just separated enough in range. I mean, he's my brother, and I love him, but we didn't interact, that closely. So, he was like, "Fine, whatever you want to do."
So after 37 years of being a veterinarian, you went to the Texas United States Air Force.
Correct. Active duty.
So talk about that. So you just got up and left, and you went. Where did you go when you? Where were you stationed at? Your training. What did you do your training at?
Okay. Well, unlike folks who go into the Air Force or Army as enlisted people, they have to learn a skill, and they, because the Air Force or the Army or any of the services are very large organizations and lots of different jobs. Coming in as a professional officer, 99% of what the Air Force wanted out of me, I already had. Being a veterinarian, preventive medicine, herd health, systems thinking, leadership, all of that I knew. I just needed to learn how to, number one, wear the uniform right, and the customs and courtesies and how this organization worked. And then the key programs that we run, with our offices. So as going in as an officer, and I went in as a captain, I was going to have enlisted troops. So we did the food inspection on base. We did what we call medical intelligence, and that's something that the officers would do. So if we had people who were deploying to various places around the world, we could go, before you go, you're going to need these shots and these pills, and don't eat that, and watch out. So all the disease things. One of the biggest components in the Air Force is a huge industrial plant. Taking care of the airplanes, servicing the airplanes, all of the civil engineering. So it's a city. It's a huge city, but the the weapons system are the highest trained, most expensive people we have, and those are our pilots. So everything goes into making all of that happen. And so there's a lot of EPA and OSHA requirements because, a lot of what we do. So public health officers, that's what we did. So I needed to learn what are the regs, what are the rules, what are the programs. But they didn't need to teach me how to be a veterinarian. I had that one. And they didn't have to teach me about leadership because, when you're a solo veterinarian and you're working on horses, you learn a lot about leadership. Okay, right now we're going to do this, this, and this with this horse, and you're going to hold him, and the rest of you stay out of the stall because I'll run you down if I have to. And so, a lot of those things I already brought to the table.
So were you one of a few female in the Air Force during that time, doing what you were doing? You see other women doing things?
There were a lot of women in the Air Force at the time. The Air Force, and especially in the enlisted ranks, because so much of what the Air Force does is highly technical. It's granted we've got warriors and big burly guys and big weapon systems and everything else, but a whole lot of the Air Force is, as I said earlier, it's like a big industrial plant. It's all about the smarts and a whole lot of where the Air Force has grown, especially in the era of all of the intelligence, and we've morphed into drones. It has to do with people, with the brain power. Granted, the pointy end of the spear are predominantly guys in the fighter community. There's a few women, a lot more women who are flying the other, the support airplanes. But the Air Force is a huge business, so all of the economics and personnel and finance and public affairs and maintenance and civil, there's women across the board in the Air Force. So I found it to be, probably not as many women then as there are now, but it isn't like I was the only one wandering around.
So did you go to Desert Storm?
Just missed it. I mean, it was breaking out. I went in January 1991, and to Shepherd Air Force Base is where we learned, how to put our uniforms on. Then went to Brooks Air Force Base to learn how to do the preventive medicine programs, and I was stationed at Luke Air Force Base. By the time I made it to Luke, I had run out of war. It was in June of that year, so darn the luck I didn't make it to that one.
Okay, so you were there 3 years, right?
Yes.
Okay, can you do any vivid memories stand out that something you would like to share? Anything just pop out at your head? Said this when I was here. I know you were. And they have horses in the military? So you just went in. You didn't do any veterinary.
No.
No animals, right?
Well, not in my role as an Air Force officer. On base, if Air Force families have pets, there's actually an Army veterinarian that does that. So the Army takes care of that. What I found going in the Air Force is, unless we were deployed, you had a work week that ended at about 4:30, 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon and started again around 7:30 on Monday morning. And having worked 7 days a week, 14 hours a day for all those years, I didn't know what people did. So
more of a normal routine.
Yeah, but what do people do? And so, I tried doing some hobbies and crafts. And I'd never done these things because I'd just been so busy working and paying off my 21% business loan. And so after a while, in Phoenix, Arizona, there's a racetrack. It's called Turf Paradise. And I just kind of looked around and I said, there's regulatory, the state of Arizona had people on the regulatory side. So I called up the Arizona Racing Commission and talked with the gentleman who was the executive director, and we hit it off right away because he was a lifelong horseman and so forth. And I said, do you need some help? And he went, yes. And so I went to my commander and said that the racing commission, I said, and these are the good guys. These are the ones that if a horse is coming in to race and he's not sound, if he's lame or sore or whatever, we're the ones who say, no, you're not going to race. Or there's a drug testing program. And so my commander said, number one, you're in the Air Force. We own you. And I said, got it. Yes, sir. But he said, as long as you work for the good guys, none of this private practice business. no being on call, but if you want to work for the good guys. So on the weekends, I work for the Arizona Racing Commission at Turf Paradise, and then in the summers up at Prescott, Arizona. So that was fun. It kind of kept my hand in with the horses, and like I said, it was working for the good guys. And since I had practiced for so many years, as people would bring horses up and try to slip one into the races that really didn't need to run, it didn't bother me at all to just say, that horse, you're out. And
did you get any pushback when you said no, this horse is out? You get any pushback from anybody? Can you say anything? Yes, any push, just a little?
Oh no, more than a little. One day, in Arizona, the way that they did the racing, and it's different than the way Texas does things now in most states, but I was not permitted. It was just not part of the protocol to go out and examine the horses in the morning. That's very common in other states. So I did what we call my pre-race. I got some idea who was going to run in the races. I'd read the racing form, and I went through, and here in the feature race for that day, it was a Saturday, and in the feature race here, most of the horses looked like they were all, they kind of belonged there and they'd been running. And here was a horse that 6 months previous, he had run at Santa Anita for a top end race, very high level racing. And racing at Turf Paradise is okay, but it's not Santa Anita or Del Mar, or it's a big step down when you come to Turf Paradise. And here was a horse who had raced in a top race, and he had first, and in the form they showed, furlongs, a quarter mile, half mile. Was leading, was 10 lengths back, and he finished the race 30 lengths back 6 months before. And then had done nothing. And here he shows up a big drop in class at Turf Paradise in the feature race. So a lot of people are betting their money because they're just thinking, here's this big horse and he's going to come in and blow the doors off everybody. And I'd already taken my big red pen and circled that one. Look at this horse, because something happened. You don't have a horse who runs that well and then, trails back, and it's only 6 months. The kinds of things, if he's still running, I'm thinking he's probably strained, we call it a bowed tendon or whatever. So as the horse came into the paddock, and I watch him, and all the rest of the horses, and horses know, they understand, they know what's going on. And most of them, they're excited, but, okay, we're ready to go. And he came in and he was in a lather, and his eye, he was frightened, and I looked at one leg, just had a regular wrap on it, and the other leg had a whole bunch of wrap on it. Come here. Come here. And I felt this horse, and even through all of that, it was just hot as could be. And this horse is just, I don't want to do this, and so I just said, you're out. That's my job.
That's your job. So you did your job.
And the paddock, that's where the horses get saddled at Turf Paradise, is very small, and the public is just right there. And the track owner came down and called me all kinds of uncomplimentary, ungentlemanly names. I won't repeat those because I'll try to be a lady. But let's just say he thought that he could come down and get in my face. And he was paying my paycheck, but I didn't need this job. I'm working for, I work for the Air Force. I'm doing this because I just, I love horses. And so I keyed open the microphone. Back then, the radios were, what we call bricks. So I keyed open my brick, and it had the little antenna on it. And he was about this far from my face, calling me all these names, thinking he could get me to, because it's my decision. I'm the track vet. It's my decision. And I'm tapping on his chest with the antenna, and it is my decision. That horse is not going to race. He is not sound. He's highly likely to break down, and I'm not going to have him snap his legs off and cause a big pile up out here on your racetrack. And I didn't know that the stewards could make it from the very top where the stewards sit. They can see everything. They're at the very top. They made it all the way down into the paddock just like that.
Separated y'all.
And I just said, if you don't like it, I quit. I'll go get in my car. I'm leaving. If I leave, you don't have any more races today. How do you like me now?
So after that, so the race, so after
The
that,
horse didn't run.
Horse didn't run, horse didn't run. Okay, so you were doing it like on weekends, so that was able to
Yeah.
fill in your time.
Yeah.
Well, you was living basically a normal life.
Yeah.
So you was in United States Air Force for 3 years, and you also, I know, what you went to the when Katrina came through in New Orleans, you had a group went to Katrina for recovery. Talk about that.
Okay. So 3 years of active duty, went in at age 37, wearing captain's bars. Most of my rank peers were 10 years younger than me. So the senior officers running around and say, man, this is just one fire-breathing captain. They don't see, I'm their age. The senior
Mhm.
colonels and the general who was the wing commander at the base, he and I were the same age. And, they didn't realize that 10 years prior, I'd been making multi-million-dollar decisions and taking my, so after 3 years of active duty, I reached a fork in the road. I could stay in active duty Air Force, and big Air Force was after me because I'd done well. I had deployed to Egypt during Restore Hope, did well. I mean, it's just, it wasn't that hard a job. And
You loved what you were doing.
he was trying to get me to stay in and sign on and, promote me early, but that would be a service commitment. And I said, I didn't really come in here intending to make a career out of active duty, and just the age difference for the rank and the age difference. But while I'd been, and this is Luke Air Force Base, which is right on the western edge of Phoenix. So a lot of Guard and Reserve, you hear about two weeks a year and 2 days a month, 2 weeks a year, or summer camp. Well, a lot of Guard and Reserve units would come in, and they come into an active duty base and come in and are your extra help. And so I'm meeting my counterparts, so other public health officers who are in the Guard and Reserve, and they're university veterinarians, and they're very accomplished people, but they still are patriots and serving their country. And they were my peers, age and experience wise. So I said, that's where I belong. So I had an offer from the Nebraska Air National Guard to join them. When the general came down, the active duty general came down and said, I'll promote you early, and here, sign on the line for another 3 years in the Air Force. I said, thank you very much, sir, but I'm going in the Guard. He was like, dang. So I went in the Guard, was in Nebraska, worked for the Racing Commission there, worked in a veterinary practice, was in the Air Guard, so 3 jobs going on. The chief vet job for the state of Texas, Texas Racing Commission, came up, and 3 of my friends from all around different places in the country, didn't know each other, all said, Connie, you need this job. So that brought me to Texas. So I worked for the state as the chief vet for the Texas Racing Commission, and said part of my condition coming into the Racing Commission is I let the executive director know. I said, I'm in the Guard. And I'm in the Guard not a little, I'm in the Guard a lot. So I will do every bit of this job, this Racing Commission job, but we're still working for the same governor. But when the Guard calls, that's important to me, and I can't afford. State jobs don't pay much, and I was still paying off that business loan. I need it. I can't afford to work for you unless I'm in the Guard. So things worked out, and I was in the Texas Air National Guard. Started it in Houston, and then at Kelly. Now we've traversed about 8 years. 2005 was a very active year. At that point, I was the commander of the medical group at Kelly Air Force Base, Texas Air National Guard, so the 149th Fighter Wing. We had been designated by National Guard Bureau to be FEMA Region 6. So FEMA Region 6 is Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico. Who am I missing? Arkansas. And Talon. You are going to be the medical component to the homeland CBRNE response, so chemical warfare or biologic warfare or whatever. And so good news, bad news is here's this about $5 million worth of equipment, and this is essentially a portable emergency room. So if there's some huge disaster that happens or a big attack that happens, and this is 2005, so 9/11 is still very fresh. Okay, fine, we got it. So good news, bad news is we have this additional training requirement, but we also have this really cool $6 million portable. I use portable loosely, portable in a semi, portable. It isn't like you've got back portable in a semi. And so we trained to that mission. It was a great mission. Other states, the other states around were very aware of it, and so it was a great opportunity. And also, when we trained to this mission, I could reach into the other two medical groups in Texas, and I couldn't pull somebody in against their will, but I said, hey, if you want to be part of the team is bigger than just my own group. Okay, fine. So we trained, blah blah blah. Here comes Hurricane Katrina, and Louisiana said, help.
They needed help.
And Texas, we know our way in Louisiana. For the Guard, we know our way in Louisiana. When they need help, Texas saddles up, the agreements happen, and we go in and help. And they said, help. And oh, by the way, we heard about that nifty thing you got. Bring that too. So, okay, fine. So we mobilized in, and this was in the very early, very, very early stages. I mean, I walked into the airport on the 1st of September. And that was as we came in the airport, the ambulance drivers were bringing people in and then just leaving the keys to the ambulance, and then they were leaving, and we walked in. New Orleans Airport has had a big renovation since 2005, but parts of it are still there, and I still get the heebie-jeebies when I go, which is seldom. But it was just wall to wall senior medical, old people with catheters and just hospital gowns and just a triage tag around their neck. And it was just, as far as the eye could see, litters and stretchers. And there are a couple little tents that the DMAT teams, so that's the Health and Human Services civilian teams, the DMAT teams had gotten in there about 12 hours ahead of us. And it was just, where do you start? You just turn and that person needs help. And you'd ask them, what medications do you take? And I take a little pink pill. So here are all these people in just horrible situation. We walked into that. We didn't unpack our stuff yet because things were still, and they had plenty of stuff. So I told all my troops, I just said, find your counterparts in this DMAT team and just go be helpful. Till I have further notice, we've been told to come here, so we're not going to sit. There's plenty to do. And I went and found the commander of the DMAT team, and that poor gentleman was he was absolutely overwhelmed. We call it battle fatigue, or he couldn't even speak to me. He was just, and I said, here I am, here's what I bring, what do you want us to do? And he was absolutely overwhelmed. So we went out, I just told my folks, just get busy. Don't leave this building, and if you hear me yell, they all knew my voice. You hear me yell and say, saddle up, you come back, because that means we're doing something else. So we got in there and didn't know, and after about 4 or 5 hours, and my folks were great, they just got in and just helping all they could, as tragic as the situation was. And here I looked up, and here came a fellow that I knew from active duty Air Force. Mm-hmm. And he's the commander of an even bigger Air Force medical thing. And he said, okay, Connie, I'm coming in with a hospital. What do you got? And I went, I got an emergency room. And he said, rock, paper, scissors. And he said, we're going to be here. He says, I have it. We are going to be here. We're going to be the medical facility as people get on Air Force airplanes to then be evacuated to wherever. And I was like, okay, swell. And where are we going to go? And just at that point, someone came and tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and here were some of my Texas National Guard Army guys. But at this point, I knew who the Texas guys were, and they're bringing in a soldier who had just been shot at the convention center. He's coming in on a stretcher. He's got a bullet wound, because the convention center was wild. And he said, Connie, gather up your people. You guys have orders to go to the convention center. Where that guy came from with the bullet wound is okay. So gathered up my phone. Okay, everybody, and but at this point they'd all been working about 8 hours, and this is after driving in from Texas. So I said, okay, everybody, we went down to where the the luggage carousels were, and I said, bed down as best you can, get some sleep as best you can. You know, as far as I know, we're going to move out first thing in the morning. And so then I started, okay, who, what, where, when, how, and I took my, my number one guy with me. And we went to where all of the Texas military forces, and it was a big coordination center, and it was the training center for the Saints, so that big inflated arena, they picked a nice, comfortable place to be. And so we went in there, and he said, all right, you and your medics are going to go down to the convention center and set up your medical facility, and there's going to be a rotary wing, so a helicopter airlift convention center. All right. And, you can't unsee the soldier who got shot. And I said, okay, I got my medics. We have deployed generally within CONUS, within we're next door neighbors. We drove over to Louisiana. Giving medics guns is seldom a good idea. Because they're just not, gun people, and you send us to war, we have to qualify on our arms, but it's, to protect, you are the weapons of last resort. So when we deployed to Hurricane, we didn't deploy with any weapons. And we didn't deploy with a dedicated security team. So now he's saying, you're going down to the convention center. Okay, great. Who is my security team? Who's coming with me to protect, because we're going in with drugs, stuff.
Security.
And my Texas Army Guard Task Force commander said, I'm not sending another team with you, you're going. And I said, why? Because it's too dangerous.
He told you that?
Yeah. What do you mean it's too dangerous? It's too dangerous. You send me down there with my medics, unarmed. There's people getting shot and knifed down there. Because, it was wild.
How long were you there, you and your team?
Well, and so I said, fine, leave the guys who are taking us in, the big 5-ton trucks, because Air Force, we went to war in minivans, driving 2 semis and a couple little minivans, and we couldn't go through the water. I said, leave the guys with the trucks in case we have to get out, if it's just too dangerous, if we're overrun. And he said, no. Why? Too dangerous. So now I have a direct order, which if I disobey a direct order, I wind up going to Fort Leavenworth. Rather not do that. Rather not do that. And I am what we call Title 32. So my commander-in-chief is the governor, Rick Perry. We are tasked to the governor of Louisiana, so it's a state-to-state thing. But I'm Title 32, I'm guard. I called back to Texas, even though I'm not in the chain of command directly to Texas anymore, but I called back to my wing commander. Ow! Because I'm scared out of my mind. And he said, you have to try. If you disobey the direct order, he said, I can't help you. You have to try. You have to go, you have to try. Okay, fine. So we went down to the convention center, and there were about 18 Oklahoma guardsmen. They all look like they're about 12 years old. Just these little babies and got big guns. And I said, how many bullets you got? And they went, it was kind of like Barney Fife. And it was the parking lot across from the convention center where normally the semis that are bringing in a show or a concert or whatever park. So there was a fence, but there were big gaps. And there were lights, but the lights were shining in, and that's right. And then overhead were the overpasses for the freeway. And so I got 18 little Oklahoma guardsmen, all have about 2 bullets in these huge gaps. And we can hear what's going on in Convention Center, and none of it's good. And a Title 10 active duty Army, very, very, very senior officer came in and ordered me to send my medics directly into that convention center right now, Colonel Mcnabb. Any questions? Yes, sir. Where's my security detail? These are medics. These are medics with drugs, and there's people in there getting knives, and And he said, I have a whole rifle company. And I said, well, sir, I look forward to meeting them. And he said, well, why aren't you moving your people? And I said, As soon as I have security, we'll take care of all those people. But until then, and he just, and this is where I was Title 32. He was Title 10. He was not anywhere in my chain of command. He said, "You're in the Guard, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." Texas Air National Guard. Rick Perry, Austin, Texas. And all my people, because they're all scared out of their minds, and they're going, and it's not that we're cowards, but you don't go sending your doctors and nurses into situations where people are having knives under their throats to get a priority ticket out of Dodge. So that first night of Katrina, we had our 18 little Oklahoma Guardsmen. I told all my people, you go get in the semi-trailers. One of them was just a regular semi, and the other one was a reefer. And it was hot, it was hurricane season. So you all go in there. We had our boxes full of stuff so they could lay on top of the boxes. You guys all go in there. And my number two and I, we stayed outside as various resources came in, and that's where I met Chris Sadler, who is our wonderful owner of Honor Cafe, and he is a bona fide warrior, and he was part of a Marine recon detail that was in New Orleans on another mission, but he came out to scout around what all's happening, and he said, here I stumbled across all these medics and this girl commander, and she's scared out of her mind and getting ready to bolt back to Texas, and she begged me to stay the night with her. Not that way, but
for your security purposes.
You're a big guy with a big gun. Why don't you stay with us? And very first thing in the morning, through the night, in came lights so we could shine lights going outwards, and in came a gentleman who was a Vietnam veteran. His call sign was Superman. He was a Warrant Officer 5, and in the Army lingo, that's a big deal. Warrant officers are the specialists in what they do, and he was the top of that. And he knew all about running a landing zone for rotary wing aircraft. And so he came in, and at the break of dawn, here came about 25 Air National Guardsmen from the Louisiana Air National Guard. And they came marching, and they said, "We're looking for a Mcnabb." And they said, "We got sent in here because we were afraid. We were told you were getting ready to run back to Texas." And I said, "I've been right on the bubble all night long." And they said, so we had our security. They came in. I said, "I'm not looking to hurt anybody, but it's just rude behavior is not tolerated, and these are medics, and we got drugs, because that's part of what's in there." So we proceeded to do a 14-hour rotary wing airlift. The world hardly knows about it. 20,000 people got airlifted out of there.
Wow.
By helicopters. Still have hearing loss. But Superman came in and he ran the LZ, and at any given time there were 6 or 7 helicopters on the pad. The medical ones were coming through us. The non-medical ones came in they were getting airlifted out to the airport. At the airport, the medical ones went to my friend, and he had medics who could stabilize them if any weren't ready to get on airplanes. And so here this huge machine happened. So after about 14 hours, we were just working the whole time and running people. We ran about 5,000 or 6,000 people through our hands, of the 20,000. And everything, a little stuff, but also some pretty serious things came through. So that's where I could take, okay, you doctors, go do your doctor stuff. And my logisticians were managing. And it turns out we went out of there with more medical supplies than we went in, because various nonprofits around the country, Americans are incredibly generous, and they want to do something. And so here there were people who had been sent from various communities around the country in a school bus loaded with medical supplies. And they're driving around in one of the most dangerous places you can imagine, because law and order had long since gone out the window. And they found us, unloaded all their medical supplies. So as various Army patrols would come around, and their medics would have their little medic bag with one bag of saline, an old IV tube that was dry rotted, and come here, and I'm very senior rank, so they're not going to say, "Come here." Look at it, and I'd send them out of there with a grocery basket and all the medical supplies they needed. And so after about 14 hours, and it was just a nonstop flow, and all of a sudden, there wasn't anybody. And so we were kind of like the Munchkins, looking for the Wicked Witch of the West. We went out to the street and looked up the street. There's nobody.
Right.
And we looked down the street and there's nobody. Now what? And so just at that point, the Texas State Air Surgeon, so he's the headquarters medical guy above me, and so he'd been deployed. He knew what kind of mess we were in. He came in and he'd been able to commandeer about 5 of those 5-ton trucks. We packed up all our stuff and he took us out to the air base, the Joint Air Base in Belle Chasse, Louisiana. They had a big hangar that had been for the C-130s. We set up our emergency room and in came, and I mean, every state in the nation was sending airplanes and people. I had 12 board certified surgeon, full colonel doctors come in. I had more medics than I needed, but they brought in the whole 25-bed air transportable hospital. So our little emergency room was on the front end. Here we had this whole hospital going in this hangar. There were 10,000 guardsmen from all over the country based there at Belle Chasse, and people going out and doing various missions. And we took care of all of those people for the next 10 or 12 days. And then one day, again, this shoulder had a lot of tapping on it. There's another hurricane that's out there, so Texas wants you back.
Oh, that's when this Rita came.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
Rita
so
came.
we had time to gather our people up, and by this time there were so many medics there that we figured out, okay, who's next? It's all yours. We left the equipment there, the whole superstructure that financed Katrina bought that. Air Force had another package ready to go. And so we had a little bit of time to get home, do our laundry, go to College Station to stage to get ready to respond to Rita. And it turns out for Rita, we did very little, but we were so ready, after Katrina that, we did that. So that was quite the year.
Oh, that was quite. So what did you do? When did you retire from the service? Before you retired, you remember your last duty assignment?
My very last duty assignment, I was the Air National Guard advisor to the commander of Air Force Intelligence, Reconnaissance, and Surveillance, ISR. Prior to that, I'd been the chief of staff for the whole Texas National Guard. So I was chief of staff to the adjutant general. And in that position is where I got my top secret clearance. So as things go and where is the need for the Air Force, when the adjutant general that I served from 2009 to 2011, when he moved on, the incoming adjutant general, who had been my wing commander, who I dearly loved and greatly respected, but I had had it about enough with being the chief of staff. And so I helped him find his new chief of staff. I looked around and Air National Guard reached down and said, we really need someone who can go and advocate for our guardsmen who are attached to the ISR world. And also I wound up looking after the guardsmen who are doing the drone warfare. So what this is all around the country, there are Air National Guard bases, most of which had formerly flown fighters, so F-16s, A-10s, F-15s. And during President Obama's time, decisions were made, and a lot of those units lost their airplanes, but they still had people who were warriors and people who were highly trained and understood the mission, understood the war, and the war is still going on. And so they turned them into drone bases, so they needed people who could fly, but then people who understood warfare and had top secret clearances and so forth. And the other part is ISR, that the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance at many guard bases around the nation. We had these massive pipelines of top secret data coming in, and what the guardsmen were doing is they were doing the analysis, or they would be talking to the soldiers on the ground on a raid, but here is all the intel where we had surveillance where the bad guys were, and we'd been surveilling this target, so we knew this door is not really a door, that door over there is, and here's his kit, so as the soldiers would go in, we might have somebody in Minot, North Dakota, flying a drone, watching them with Hellfire missiles, and someone else in, Terre Haute, Indiana, saying, all right, not that door, this door over here, and so how we do warfare is highly technical. We don't like sending our guys in blind if we can, avoid it all. So the thing with all the ISR folks and having somebody medical, and also by this point I'd been a colonel since 2005. Those eagles, the feathers had been flapping pretty hard for a lot of years, but I was fearless, and as long as I didn't violate any regulations, but what is somebody going to do to me? I'm going to go do what I need to do and speak up, and I'm going to be respectful when I'm talking with 2- and 3-star generals, but if they let me come in and talk to them, we're going to talk about what I'm there to talk about. And a lot of it had to do with, here we have our guardsmen who are doing this mission the time of day here, when they're supporting the war over there, our folks are working all night long. They've been mobilized, so they have been activated, and they're on Title 10. They're active duty Air Force, even though they're at these guard units all around the country. Now, when they leave work, they go home. So the kids have soccer practice, and the spouse says the washer dryer's broken down, and so they've been working all night long. And it goes on for years. Soldiers deploy, and I don't want to take a thing away from the people who have deployed, been out there in the sandbox, gotten shot at, gotten blown up. But there's no doubt when they're at war, they know it because they're there. Our guys, they're at war when they go through those doors, and then they come out and they're not at war. And it goes on for years and years and years. And their circadian rhythm is long since gone, because they're on for 3 days and off for 2, and then on for 2 and off for, and so here, and they were not allowed. When they are there, they are in the war. They're talking with the people on the ground in the war. They are at war. This is also very sensitive, as you can imagine. I mean, they are dealing at the tippy top of intelligence. They can't talk to anyone. Their command structure, and there's a person in the intel world called an SSO. They're kind of the Nazi of, do you have the clearance? You're not leaking anything, you're not going out. And the SSOs just tell all these people, you can't say anything, nothing. The most your wife or your husband can know is that you came to work here. That's it. And these people, like I said, their circadian rhythms are completely off. There's no such thing as a good night's sleep. Plus, and as they would call it, they go to work and it's death TV. They're in the war. But they were not allowed to even go home and say, I had a really hard day, so please don't ask me anything. So we're getting all the PTS and, not too much traumatic brain injury, but, we're getting the PTS. And so my job as the advisor, as the medical advisor, and again, like I said, at this point, I'm fearless. What are you going to do? And so they're at guard bases all around the country. I said, where is their medical support? Where is the psychiatric support? And they said, well, they can get it. They can go to an active duty base. Pardon me. Okay, if I have someone who's at Ellington Field down in southeast Houston where they're flying drones, and they need to talk with somebody today. They're to drive to Lackland and get in the back of the line to see somebody at Lackland because they need help today. They're warriors. They're at war. They're in Title 10. Where is their medical support? So, that was my job, and to really have it come through, and because in the drone community and in the ISR community, the suicide rate, the divorce rate, were 9 times higher than anybody else in the Guard. So we at least, it's a difficult mission. A lot of it still goes on, not at the same op tempo as before. But if we have warriors in the field anywhere around the world, we probably have some guardsmen who are helping them. And we've got the big Air Force, and big Air Force really can't stand it when somebody knows how to read their regs.
So once you are using Texas Air National Guard,
Yes.
So what made you decide, say, okay, I think it's time for me to retire?
I was 60 years old doing this job that we just discussed. I was what we call TDY, so I was in Washington, D.C. on a mission, and I got an email saying, "Congratulations on your retirement."
Just like that.
Pardon me? Are you going? Did you just revoke my plane ticket home? And that was, in the springtime. And so I'm 60 years old, and I'm a very, very, very senior colonel, and Air Force and Guard just says, "Get out, you're too old." So they let me stay on until December, and I just said, I can. Who do you want me to arm wrestle on? I can still do the job. So is age.
You got appointed. Governor Perry did something special. Tell us about that before you retired.
When I was in the position of chief of staff, they put me into that job, and that was quite a job. There had just been an incident that the top 3 generals had all been fired because double dipping had happened. So finance, because there's guard status, active duty status, geo mandates, blah blah. There's a big financial thing, and so Governor Perry just cleaned house, 3 new generals, new chief of staff, and put me in there. Well, when you've got situations in a very large organization, and the Texas Military Department, so the Army Guard, Air Guard, has got a $500 million with a B, $500 million budget a year. It's a massive, massive organization. So here, the top 3 had gotten fired, but if you've had that kind of thing going on, there's other people who haven't been playing by the rules. So Governor Perry, his office told the new adjutant general, "We want Connie." I had not campaigned for that job, but it was just one of those, okay, fine. So I went in and I kicked over some rice bowls because I found people who had been hiring unqualified family members for lucrative jobs and so on. So it's just, this is not how it's supposed to be. The money that comes to us to do a mission goes to the mission. If there's people who have wedged themselves into places where they can do evil deeds, and misappropriate money or do things that aren't right. So I started kicking over rice bowls. When you get, and I'd been put in, and I was eligible to put on a federally recognized star, brigadier general. But there's a 2-year window, and someone else was in that billet. They had to leave. They weren't gone yet. I couldn't get promoted until I was in that. You have to be the sole occupant of a slot, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the evildoers, when you kick over a bunch of rice bowls at that level, you have the evildoers who understand how things work. So they timed things, and they knew when my eligibility was going to be. They complained against me. Well, you complain against someone who's a candidate to be a general. It doesn't go to this IG down here. It goes to this IG up here, who's in charge of looking after 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star. Oh yeah, and then here's this colonel. So they came in, what was complained against me, here's all the information, here's what happened, blah, I'm clean. I've done the investigation for you, but here's all the documentation, here's everything else. But things take time. So a week after my eligibility expired, the IG came in and said, "We looked at everything, all the information you gave us was invaluable. The complaint was absolutely bogus, and the situation at hand, you handled it perfectly." Where were you a week ago?
A week after.
A week after. So the evildoers, but it's one of those, one of them made the comment, you should have taken better care of yourself. And I said, and let you guys continue to do these things? No, it didn't worth it. So General Nichols and Governor Perry said, we still want Connie to have a star. Well, in Texas, my commander-in-chief, as long as I'm in the Sovereign Republic of Texas, is the governor. And so Governor Perry gave me a brevet star. So as long as I'm in Texas, and that's why if I write it out, it's Brigadier General Brevet Texas. I don't, to my federal Air Force friends, I don't pretend to be something I'm not. But still, what a great honor, and it was very much appreciated. My retirement check says Colonel. Thank you very much. It's not so bad, but you know, it was a great honor that Governor Perry would do that.
So did you get married during this time?
I got married in 1999.
Okay, 1999.
Yeah, so I was medical group ops group commander, and so all of that went. But my husband retired from the Guard also, so he certainly understood.
Okay. So what message would you like to leave a future generation who will view this interview with you? Do you have a message you would like to leave?
First of all, not everybody who joins the Air Force flies planes. Air Force is a huge organization. It is, culturally very different, and it's just, the weapon system for the Army are the soldiers on the ground, so go for it. Our weapon system are the pilots, and those highly technical things. So I'd say the Air Force is a wonderful place for anyone, particularly for women. Not that there's, you still have to be fit and you have to know how to fire a gun. Even if I'm a medic, I still have to qualify. But what a great place to go in and use your intellect and be challenged. And if you excel and succeed, and the core values of the Air Force are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Poof, I love it. So what a great opportunity. And for some folks, who, perhaps they've graduated from college, they have a degree, they just haven't found their niche. I mean, I went in for, I intended to do 3 years active duty. I did 3 years active duty. I loved the military part of it, and I love serving my country enough, but I found that the National Guard, wow, that is the best kept secret in the military, that I could serve. I could really make a difference. My level of rank, it isn't that I wore eagles with a little G on them. I mean, I wore full bird colonel, federally recognized. So if I got mobilized, and there were times I was active duty, I'm at a peer level. But what a great opportunity. I could have my civilian life and civilian career, but I could also serve my country. And there were a lot of times that I could really tell, not me individually, but I was part of something that really made a difference, and even at 60 years old, like I said, when they said, get out, and I said, I'm still physically fit. I can make weight and I'll arm wrestle anybody you want. They said, it doesn't matter. We need your billet. But I mean, what a great opportunity, and the friends that I made in the Guard. And, the Guard is, we all say the Guard is family. Active duty, there's a lot of wonderful things with active duty, but, you move around a lot. So if you get a boss and you don't like them, they're either going to move or you're going to move. Well, if you're in the Guard, we know each other. We stay, but you build relationships, so like when we went to Katrina, or later in 2008, I was the joint surgeon. So I moved to headquarters, but any military medical resource that was going to come or came to Texas to help in, let's see, it was Dolly, Edward, Gustav, and Ike. That was an interesting year. Not only, they had to coordinate with me, but I knew a lot of these people. People all over the country, so you can call, okay, here's the problem, here's what's going on, this is good, that's bad. You develop these relationships at the highest levels. But it isn't just, it's not an ego thing. I've had the great opportunity to be where I can make a difference. A phone call makes some things happen. There was a group, they wanted a air transportable hospital. They wanted the hospital like we had at Katrina out at Belle Chase. They wanted to bring it into Galveston. And I said, why? We got all the helicopters in the world. Anybody can get, the shortest helicopter ride you can imagine to the world-class medical care of the planet right there. Why do you want? Well, we want to be able to do orthopedic surgery and deliver babies. And I was like, it's a tent. It's a really great tent, but it's a tent. No. Why do you want? And oh, by the way, it's going to cost you $10 million, because once we bring it and set it up, we don't want it back, because it's a tent. So things like that, being able to talk with people at the highest level, the head of Texas Department of State Health Services, we were on speed dial. My phone fell in love with him. It would call his phone just in the middle of the night, just for fun. but it was what a great way to serve and really feel like what you're doing makes a difference.
Well, that's good. One last question. Is there anything you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
Don't be afraid of the military. I mean, if it's a calling, and for people, for younger people, if you think that you don't want to go in the military because you don't want somebody bossing you around, I have news for you. There's somebody to boss you around no matter where you go. But what a great opportunity to learn a trade. There are career fields, enlisted career fields in the Air Force that if you go in, biomedical equipment repair, laboratory, things in civil engineering or in communication, you come out with that level of expertise. You go to trade school, you're 18, you go in, they feed you, they clothe you, they take care of you, you learn your skill, you might deploy, you might not, you do your job. When you get out, they don't suck the knowledge out of your head. You have skills. These are skills that you can, the biomedical equipment repair, you can walk into any hospital system on the planet and probably get a high 5-figure, if not a 6-figure job in no time flat, and you have those skills for life. So, and from 18 to 22 to 23, you're just learning how to be a grown-up anyway. So, why not get some of that military? If you want to stay in and go the 20 and go active duty, good on you. If you want to go into the Guard and Reserve, get your 20 and get your health care for life. Yay. And get a check every month. Every month I get a check. Thank you, Colonel Mcnabb. We've had quite enough of you. Keep your opinions to yourself. But what a great way. But 22 years old, at the time you think you're all grown up. In retrospect, you're still just kind of wet behind the ears. But you have lived, and you've had more responsibility and skills and so forth than someone who just kind of hung around and has kind of picked up jobs as they could pick up jobs. You come out with any of those career fields at 20, 22 years old. You have been responsible for multi-millions of dollars worth of equipment. In the Navy, the troops that drive the ships are 19 and 20 years old, and they're driving aircraft carriers.
Wow.
Now, they're not all alone.
I never thought about it like that.
But you come out and you go for a job interview as a 23-year-old. If I'm hiring somebody, you're in the Air Force and you've been hanging around town doing odd jobs. You know how to show up on time, don't you? Oh, yeah. Bling, you got the job. To say nothing for you're a veteran. There's a lot to be said for that, but you've served your country, but you understand discipline, you understand how to make things happen. Excellence in all we do. You got some pride. It gives you so much. So whether you just a couple of years in, now granted, if you are fortunate enough or unfortunate enough, I mean, if you deploy, then that's what America asks of you, and you go do it, do your job. When the wars broke out in Iraq and so forth, I was in the pipeline to go work the medical logistics, but I was a very, very senior colonel, and active duty and very senior Guard colonels. We tend to speak our minds. There really wasn't a job for me down on the front lines, not being an MD, so being a DVM. So I didn't get into that. So that's where all the homeland stuff. But if indeed that's what the nation calls you to do, you go do it. But the overall benefit, to me it's a no-brainer. If you're physically fit and you got something going for you, silly me, I went to all through vet school, student loans, business loan at 21% interest, paid off all that debt after the fact. Instead of, I could have gone through vet school, gotten out debt-free, served 4 or 5 years, and the first 4 or 5 years of practice, you're scary anyway. I mean, you don't really hit your stride as a professional until you have some under your belt. Just stupid me. I should have gone for the Air Force Health Professions recruiter on the front end instead of getting the postcard from God later on.
So you fully retired, and so you live here in Montgomery County, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So how long you been in Montgomery County?
Moved to Montgomery County when Sandy and I got married in '99.
Okay. And you're one of actually you're probably the first female veterinarian I ever met. Yeah.
Well, now there's a lot of female veterinarians.
Mm-hmm.
Not so many female veterans, but there's.
I mean veterinarian, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's but the women vets, all different. Not everybody has a great time, but again, when you have people who join the military 17, 18, 19 years old, a lot depends on their circumstances and what they went in. I do recommend to women who've got an IQ, pretty smart, go in the Air Force.
Okay.
Go in the Air Force, because that's it's the nature of the beast, and the technical jobs that are in there and the skills that you'll come out and and the confidence that you'll have is just wonderful.
So, Brigadier General Dr. Connie Mcnabb, I thank you so much for this opportunity, allowing us to do this video history project. Thank you so much, and may God bless you, and may He keep you in all that you do.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
He's allowed me to live.